AB 3088, the Tenant, Homeowner, and Small Landlord Relief and Stabilization Act of 2020. It is a mouthful. So it's essentially like 4036, it's a stopgap, and it has not been passed yet. It's being voted on Monday. It needs a 2/3 majority vote in the Senate, which is by no means a guarantee. It needs a 2/3 vote as opposed to a simple majority because it's an urgency bill. It needs to get passed, voted on Monday and signed either Monday or Tuesday. So generally speaking, it would allow evictions. This bill only applies to residential tenants and landlords. It would allow evictions to begin next week, as are currently slated, given the rising of the Judicial Council eviction freeze. But in non-payment of rent cases, tenants would have the ability to stop that if they can declare under penalty of perjury. So that's the difference between the 4036, that they are, quote, have a COVID-19 related financial distress. And there's a variety of definitions for this in the bill, but it's essentially my income is lower, or my expenses are higher for COVID related reasons. So not a huge bar to overcome, but they're still making this representation. Even before, so if they declare this, then the landlord cannot evict them for rent that has been accrued from March through January 31st. If rent is due from September to January 31st, though, tenants will be on the hook for paying 25% of that balance. So they would essentially get this notice, which is now a 15-day notice, not a 3-day notice, to pay or quit. There would be a form declaration of financial hardship that they could fill out if applicable. And if it's for rent within this September to January transition period, they would have to pay that by January 31st. So it's not due within a certain time frame of the notice being given. It just needs to be paid by January 31st. So what this essentially creates is a bubble of protection for these residential tenants until February, whereas no eviction or unlawful detainer judgment could be entered in that time period. As far as the landlord's relief, some of these other bills had potential mortgage forbearance requirements. There was large pushback from the banks that kind of nixed that really quick. So what this does is that it converts. So if you have if it's a landlord is pursuing residential rent from a tenant, that rent, while it cannot be a basis for eviction anymore because they have financial hardship, the landlord can pursue that rent in small claims court. So it gives landlords a more expedited method to obtain rent as opposed to filing a simple breach of contract case, which could take 12 to 18 months like any other case. It's not a UD in that expedited sense, but it's small claims. They've expanded the jurisdictional amount for that court, which used to be $10,000. So you can pursue it in that realm, but you cannot do it until next March. So there's a ton of, you're seeing this pattern of, okay, things can't happen until February, until March of next year. And it's allowing the legislator, the thought is that the legislator will come back in January and figure out amendments or additional longer term solutions for these landlords and tenants. And then additionally, and this is kind of just, might be meaningless, but landlords, borrowers that are applying for forbearance, which they can do if their tenants aren't paying them their payments, they will be required to be given a specific reason if they are denied mortgage forbearance and that landlord is affected by COVID. So, whether that is just, illusory, maybe, but it requires a little more specificity from the mortgage servicer to provide a reason why they're being denied. There's some more nuance to it. I don't want to go too deep into it now, but the one part that I will say is that if you're a residential tenant and you're saying you have financial hardship, that's the end of the story. Unless you're a quote unquote high income earner or high income tenant, which is 130% of the median income in San Diego. If you are that individual tenant, you have to provide proof of this hardship, whether that's a W-2, whether it's a termination letter, anything like that, that shows your income is not what it used to be and you cannot pay rent as it's due. And finally, the big part of this that kind of makes this somewhat applicable to commercial tenants is that whereas these local communities that have their eviction moratorium in place, San Diego's eviction moratorium applies to residential and commercial tenants. It essentially allows them to provide proof of hardship that they cannot be evicted then for non-payment of rent as a result of that hardship. That expires September 30th, 2020, with rent then being due in December 2020. This 3088 bill would not allow those local communities, San Diego, LA, wherever, to extend the term of those moratoriums now. So it kind of puts a pin in those, it kind of puts everyone on the same playing field from a state level, and these local communities cannot be doing their own things, at least until next February. So there's a lot of specifics that go into this, and a lot of it's a little confusing, a little vague, and a little open-ended, but in large part, it allows tenants to seek the protection for non-payment of rent if they have been COVID affected. Sometimes you have to prove it, sometimes you don't. But it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out next week for sure.
Cool. Well, that's a mouthful. So I know that I know that you had to cover a lot of ground in a very short period of time, and Manish, you did too. So I appreciate you guys kind of trying to compact a lot of information in a very short period of time. I do want to talk. I know I see a couple of questions here from, I think Joan Selleck had, the eviction. Can you evict right now? And just to summarize the answer to that question, you couldn't evict until September 1st. September 1st, they weren't issuing any what we would call a summons in the legal field. So that prevented you. You could file your claim, but you couldn't actually do anything with it because you can't serve somebody without a summons. So they'd put a freeze on all summons, commercial, COVID-related, non-COVID-related. You couldn't evict at all. I don't know about small claims court because I don't practice there. Someone else may know the answer to whether that's open or not. So they'd put a freeze on that. And just following up on 3088, which is likely to be passed on Monday, unless you all get on the phone after this. But like it's likely to be passed on Monday. It's going to freeze summons on all what they're calling COVID-related evictions for residential, not commercial. Commercial is going to open up. Non-COVID is going to open up, and even COVID-related that does not follow the formula that they've set forth that Chris just outlined is going to open up. So that's kind of the short answer to that.